Hello, everybody. I have attempted to read this script about 20 times, and I apparently cannot read from a script. So there goes my career as a newscaster. I've always really wanted to tell this story. So instead of a fancy introduction where I read like a Shakespearean actor, I am just going to tell the story as best I can. Yes, I am looking at notes, and this has been extremely frustrating trying to record it all cool and polished, but I think this is such an interesting story, so I'm just going to jump right into it. And there's no illusions that this is an amazing professional production, but I don't care. So here we go. So in November of 1879, a young man of 18 is laid to rest in the English countryside. This poor young guy had died just a week earlier of pleurisy, which, according to my internet research, is an inflammation of the lining of the lungs, which is caused by an infection. So he was buried in Windsor, the town of Windsor, and not just any old place, but St. George's Chapel within the walls of Windsor Castle. St. George's Chapel is the burial place of kings and queens of Britain, their families, select friends. But this young man wasn't English. He wasn't even European. He was from Ethiopia, which was then also known as Abyssinia. But he was buried at Queen Victoria's personal instruction. So while his national origin were unique for the 19th century English countryside, to be sure, you didn't see a lot of Ethiopian young people running around, his status and his rank being buried at St. George's Chapel was anything but unique for that location. Because this young man himself was a prince. His father was an emperor. His father boasted the title King of Kings. He claimed descent from the biblical King Solomon himself. But his father was dead, as was the poor man's mother. His father's rule had been swept away, and Ethiopia was being ruled by another dynasty. So this is the story of Prince Alemayehu of Ethiopia, and how tragedy led to him being laid to rest so far from home. And I will apologize in advance for my pronunciation of Ethiopian people and places. So how did this all start? So his father took the throne in 1855. His father was Emperor Tewodros II, which from my research is the equivalent of Theodore in English. So his father had been asking, from what I can tell, Britain specifically, for military aid against other rival local rulers. Ethiopia then, and for a lot of its history, seemed to be sort of a rotation of local rulers taking over the sort of paramount throne or, high king spot. Then you get to be called King of Kings, undoubtedly. So his father, Alemayehu's father, had been fighting for a lot of years and asking for help from the Brits. So even reaching out to Queen Victoria herself for aid. Apparently, at some point, he lost his nerve, and I say that as in not any kind of mental illness reflection, but he didn't know what else to do. So he took a number of people hostage, including the British consul Charles Cameron, missionaries, civilians, including women and children. So the conditions alternated between kindness and cruelty, apparently according to Tewodros's mood at that moment. So Captain Cameron, the consul, Charles Cameron was a captain, himself wrote to the British press from jail. And according to the UK's National Army Museum, their awesome website, so these letters from jail, as well as the fact that women and children were being held there, led to public outcry. And finally, the British decided that strong measures needed to be taken against Emperor Tewodros. So it was actually largely Indian troops that came over 10,000 British and at the time called the Indian Empire troops under Lieutenant General Sir Robert Napier, who was a veteran of multiple wars in India, including the Great Mutiny of 1857, wars against the Sikhs of India, and as well as the Second Opium War in China. So they left Bombay, modern day Mumbai, in December 1867 en route to Ethiopia. So again, and I thought this was fascinating, according to the National Army Museum of the UK, uh, they used relatively modern logistics and technology. So they laid telegraph lines, which pretty modern for the time, especially for Ethiopia. Um, Desalination plants for drinking water, undoubtedly in the harsh, dry climate. They built a temporary harbor, as well as railway lines, which were equipped with um, locomotives that they shipped across the ocean from India itself. So after marching about 400 miles inland from the sea, from modern day Eritrea, they reached Magdala, which was the capital sort of mountain fortress of Ethiopia, where Emperor Tewodros and his supporters, troops were holed up. And finally, in April 1868, uh, after repelling an attack by the Ethiopians the day before, there was just a 90-minute to 2-hour battle, and the Brits launched rockets and mortars against the defenders, who obviously were not very well equipped because the British themselves had turned them down for equipment, which is what led to this issue in the first place. So the British and Indian Empire troops storm the fortress, and they find the emperor dead by his own hand. Actually took his own life using a pistol that Queen Victoria had gifted to him, undoubtedly in some kind of diplomatic gift package that was sent. It's kind of ironic, and yeah, very interesting story. And obviously, this would have a big effect on our young prince and his life. So, in addition to the prince and his mother, the empress, who was still alive, many items were taken to Britain. It says that it was required to have 15 elephants and 200 mules just to carry all the loot back to the coast, which included religious articles from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, liturgical implements, things like that. There were crowns taken, royal crowns, one of which was returned in 1925 by King George V to Haile Selassie, who's very well known in the 20th century. Returned to him in person, I assume in London or in England. More items eventually would be returned in the early 2000s. And then in 2023, a lock of Prince Alemeyu's hair would eventually be returned as well. The prince himself was not returned to Ethiopia, as we will learn more in our story. So the prince's mother died on the way to Britain. Assume that she would have went all the way there with him as well, but she passed away on the way there, I think due to illness. So Prince Alemayehu arrives in England. He visits Queen Victoria on the Isle of Wight in July of 1868, just a few months after losing his father, and even less than a few months after losing his mother. He stayed with a British captain, Captain Tristram Speedy, and his wife. Captain Speedy, yes, that was his name, was an explorer and adventurer who had actually been recruited to join the Abyssinian expedition due to his knowledge of the country. So the prince, when he gets to England, being a royal and being upper crust, at least back in Ethiopia, is enrolled at prestigious schools, but according to what's been written about him, he struggled academically due to his ill health, though every indication is that he was very bright, but he couldn't adapt to the English climate. Um, and Queen Victoria herself writes in her diaries that she took pity on him, said he was lonely and that he was self-conscious because of his skin color. So finally, we get to 1879, after about 11 years in England, and the prince falls ill and dies. Very sad. We had seen earlier about his ill health due to the English climate, but now finally he loses his life at the age of 18. Um, Queen Victoria, of course, took note of this. She requested that he be buried at St. George's Chapel, and she wrote in her diary afterwards of just the pity that everyone felt for this young man in his tragic circumstances. So, very interesting story. Obviously, you have the mighty British Empire going up against a relatively under-equipped, undeveloped, no offense to Ethiopians, um, unprepared country on the far side of the world from Britain. Well, not quite the far side, but long ways away. Um, Very tragic story. Um, some people say that he was kidnapped from Ethiopia. I would definitely want to address that. I would say that maybe he was rescued out of Ethiopia, at least for that time. There were rival claimants who took over after his father died. So we can only imagine what might have happened to the prince if he stayed in Ethiopia. So the prince passes away and he's buried at St. George's Chapel, like we said, in November 1879. There have been requests from the Ethiopian government to have the prince's body returned to Ethiopia, but according to the British royal family, as recently as 2023, they have said that this is not possible due to the effect it would have on burials near the prince's body. So I'm not an engineer, I'm not an archaeologist, I can't speak to that claim whether it's true or not, but that at least is the current stance of the royal family about moving the prince's body back to Ethiopia. But they did take that time, that opportunity, to send a lock of the prince's hair, which was in the royal collection, back to Ethiopia. Common thing in the 1800s, taking a snippet of someone's hair when they pass away. So we can talk about the hospitality of the British in welcoming him there. I think it probably was hospitable. I'm not sure how he would have done if he had stayed in Ethiopia, but he probably would have been able to return one day at the very least. So while he's not back in Ethiopia, you can't deny that St. George's Chapel is the most appropriate place for him to be laid to rest. And so, on a final note, of course, he does remain there to this day, and there is a plaque commemorating his grave, which was donated by Queen Victoria, and it has the famous line from the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew: "I was a stranger, and you took me in." So that's the story. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.